The dust rose in lazy spirals beneath the hooves of the cattle, hanging in the air like a curtain between the earth and the merciless August sun. The year was 1883, and the Texas plains stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the occasional mesquite tree or weathered rock formation. This was cattle country, where fortunes were made and lost with the turn of the seasons, and where men measured their worth in acres and head of livestock. Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his brow with a dirt-stained sleeve, squinting against the glare as he guided his horse along the fence line. He'd been riding since before dawn, checking for breaks in the wire that might let the cattle stray onto neighboring land. It was thankless work, the kind that left a man's back aching and his throat parched. But it was honest labor, and in these parts, that counted for something. At 28, Jake had the lean, weathered look of a man who'd spent most of his life under the open sky. His hands were calloused from years of rope work, his skin burned brown by the sun, and his gray eyes held that particular weariness that came from too many nights sleeping on hard ground and too many days fighting against the elements. He'd drifted from ranch to ranch for the better part of a decade, following the work wherever it led him, never staying long enough to put down roots. The Hartley Ranch was his latest stop, a sprawling operation that covered nearly 20,000 acres of prime grazing land. Old Samuel Hartley had built it up from nothing over 30 years, turning a modest homestead into one of the most profitable cattle operations in the county. Jake had hired on 2 months ago, just another nameless cowhand among the dozen or so men who worked the ranch, content to earn his $40 a month and keep to himself. The sun was climbing toward its zenith when Jake spotted a broken strand of wire near the creek bed. He dismounted, pulling his tools from the saddlebag, and set about making the repair. The work was routine, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he twisted the wire back together. He was so focused on the task that he didn't hear the approach of hoofbeats until they were almost upon him. "You missed breakfast again." Jake looked up to see a young woman on horseback, holding a cloth-wrapped bundle. She wore a simple blue cotton dress, practical rather than fashionable, with a wide-brimmed hat shading her face from the sun. Even so, he could see the delicate features that marked her as Samuel Hartley's daughter, the same high cheekbones, the same determined set to her jaw, though softened by youth and a gentleness her father had long since lost. "Miss Hartley." Jake touched the brim of his hat in greeting, straightening from his work. "Didn't expect to see you out this way." Elizabeth Hartley, Beth, as she preferred to be called when her father wasn't within earshot, dismounted with easy grace. "Maria thought you might be hungry. She insisted I bring this out to you." She handed him the bundle, and Jake caught the scent of fresh biscuits and bacon. His stomach reminded him that he'd been up since 4 that morning with nothing but black coffee to sustain him. "That's kind of her," he said, accepting the food. "And kind of you to bring it." Beth smiled, a quick flash that transformed her serious expression. "Maria's convinced that you cowboys would waste away to nothing if she didn't mother you all. She's probably right." Jake found himself studying her as she spoke. He'd seen her around the ranch. Of course, it was impossible not to notice the boss's daughter, but they'd never exchanged more than a polite nod or a murmured greeting. Up close, he could see that she had her father's green eyes, though hers held a warmth that old Samuel's had lost somewhere along the way. A strand of auburn hair had escaped from beneath her hat, curling against her neck in the heat. "Your father know you're out here?" Jake asked, unwrapping the biscuits. He knew Samuel Hartley's reputation, a hard man who ran his ranch with an iron fist and kept his daughter under close watch. Beth's smile faded slightly. "Father's in town on business. He won't be back until evening." She paused, then added with a touch of defiance, "Besides, I know how to handle myself. I've been riding these lands since I was 5 years old." "I don't doubt it," Jake said, taking a bite of biscuit. The food was good, better than the usual fare they got in the bunkhouse. "Still, might be best if you headed back. Wouldn't want you to get in trouble on my account." "You're probably right," Beth agreed, but she made no move to leave. Instead, she walked to the creek bank, gazing out over the water. "It's peaceful out here," Sometimes I think this is the only place where I can actually breathe." Jake watched her, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides. He'd seen that look before, on horses that had been penned up too long, yearning for open space. "Ranch life not agreeing with you?" he asked carefully. Beth turned to face him, and for a moment, he saw something raw in her expression, a mixture of frustration and longing that she quickly masked. "Let's just say that being Samuel Hartley's daughter comes with certain expectations." Jake nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. He'd worked for enough wealthy ranchers to know how they viewed their children, particularly their daughters, as assets to be managed, marriages to be arranged for the benefit of the family fortune. It was none of his business, but he felt a stir of sympathy for her nonetheless. "Well," he said, finishing the last of the biscuits, "I appreciate you riding all the way out here. Been a while since I had a meal that didn't taste like trail dust." Beth's smile returned, genuine this time. "You're welcome. Maybe I'll tell Maria she needs to check on you cowboys more often. Make sure you're not all starving out here in the wilderness." She moved back to her horse, gathering the reins with practiced ease. As she prepared to mount, she paused, looking back at him. "You're Jake Morrison, aren't you? From Colorado?" "That's right," Jake said, surprised she knew his name. "Though I haven't been back to Colorado in years." "The other men speak well of you," she said. "They say you're one of the best horsemen they've ever seen." Jake felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the sun. "They're being generous, just doing my job." Beth swung up into the saddle with fluid grace, settling her skirts around her from atop her horse. She looked down at him, and Jake was struck again by the way the sunlight caught in her green eyes. "Well, Mr. Morrison," she said, "try not to work yourself to death out here. Maria would never forgive me if something happened to one of her boys." With that, she turned her horse and rode off, leaving Jake standing by the creek with the empty cloth in his hands. He watched until she disappeared over a rise, then shook his head and returned to his work. But as he twisted the wire and checked the fence posts, he found his thoughts returning to those green eyes and the way she'd said his name. The afternoon wore on, brutal in its heat. Jake worked steadily, moving along the fence line, making repairs where needed. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, he was bone-tired and covered in dust. He mounted his horse and began the long ride back to the ranch, his mind already on the meal waiting in the bunkhouse and the narrow cot where he could rest his aching body. As the ranch buildings came into view, Jake saw the other hands already gathering for supper. Smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney, and he could hear the rough laughter of men relaxing after a hard day's work. This was the life he knew, the only life he'd known for years, the endless cycle of work and rest, the camaraderie of men who understood the harsh realities of the frontier. But as he dismounted and led his horse to the barn, Jake's eyes were drawn to the big house on the hill, where lamplight was beginning to glow in the windows. Somewhere up there, Elizabeth Hartley was probably preparing for her own evening meal, surrounded by fine china and polished silver, a world away from the rough planks and tin plates of the bunkhouse. He shook his head, annoyed with himself for the direction of his thoughts. He was a drifter, a hired hand with nothing to his name but a horse, a saddle, and the clothes on his back. Girls like Elizabeth Hartley were meant for better things than the likes of him. Best to put her out of his mind and focus on what mattered, earning his wages and moving on when the time came. But as Jake unsaddled his horse and rubbed him down, he couldn't quite forget the way she'd smiled when she'd handed him that bundle of food, or the wistfulness in her voice when she'd talked about breathing freely in the vast emptiness of the Texas plains, where a man could ride for days without seeing another soul. Those small moments of human connection took on a weight they might not have carried elsewhere. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky as Jake made his way to the bunkhouse. Tomorrow would bring another day of hard work, another day of fighting against the land and the elements. But tonight, as he lay on his cot listening to the snores of his fellow cowboys, Jake Morrison found himself thinking about green eyes and auburn hair, and wondering if he'd see her again. September arrived with little relief from the heat, but the days grew marginally shorter, and the work on the Hartley ranch continued its relentless pace. Jake had settled into the rhythm of ranch life, rising before dawn to tend the horses, spending long days in the saddle, and falling into exhausted sleep each night. He'd grown accustomed to the other hands, earned their respect through hard work and competence, and found a measure of contentment in the simple routine. But something had shifted since that day by the creek. He found himself watching for a flash of blue cotton or the sound of hoofbeats that might herald Beth Hartley's approach. Their paths crossed occasionally, a brief greeting when she visited the stables, a nod of acknowledgement when she rode past the cattle pens, but nothing more substantial than those fleeting moments. It was on a cool evening in late September that fate intervened. Jake had volunteered for the night watch, preferring the solitude to the cramped quarters of the bunkhouse. He was checking on the horses in the main barn when he heard soft footsteps on the packed earth floor. "Who's there?" he called, hand instinctively moving to his hip, though he wore no gun. "It's just me." Beth's voice came from the shadows. She stepped into the circle of lantern light, wrapped in a dark shawl against the evening chill. "I couldn't sleep. I thought I'd check on Duchess. She seemed off her feed today." Jake relaxed, though his heart rate didn't quite return to normal. "She's in the third stall. Seemed fine when I looked in on her an hour ago." They walked together to the mare's stall, where the elegant bay horse nickered softly at Beth's approach. Beth ran her hand along the animal's neck, murmuring soothing words. Jake watched, noting the easy way she handled the horse, the genuine affection in her touch. "She's my mother's horse," Beth said quietly, "or was before." She trailed off, her hand stilling on Duchess's mane. "Before she passed?" Jake ventured gently. Beth nodded, not meeting his eyes. 5 years ago. Father keeps saying we should sell her. She's getting old, doesn't earn her keep, but I can't bear to let her go. Nothing wrong with holding on to things that matter. Jake said, sometimes that's all we've got. Beth looked at him then, really looked at him, and Jake felt something shift in the air between them. The barn suddenly seemed smaller, more intimate, filled with the warm scent of hay and horses and the soft glow of the lantern. "You must think I'm foolish," she said. "A spoiled rancher's daughter, worried about one old horse when there are real problems in the world." "I don't think that at all," Jake said firmly. "I think you're someone who cares about things most folks overlook. Nothing foolish about that." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Duchess settle back into her hay. Then Beth spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Father's planning to marry me off." The words hit Jake like a physical blow, though he tried not to show it. "That's so?" "Charles Whitman, from Dallas. He owns several banks, has business interests throughout Texas. Father thinks it would be a good match, profitable for both families." Her voice was carefully neutral, but Jake could hear the underlying bitterness. "What do you think?" he asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Beth's laugh was short and humorless. "What I think doesn't much matter, does it? I'm 22 years old, practically a spinster by father's standards. I should be grateful that a man like Charles is interested. Should be and want to be are two different things," Jake observed. She turned to face him fully then, and in the lantern light, he could see tears threatening in her eyes. "Have you ever felt trapped, Mr. Morrison? Like your whole life has been decided for you before you even had a chance to live it?" Jake thought of his own past, the choices that had led him to this nomadic life. "Can't say I have, not in the way you mean. But I've known what it's like to feel like you don't have options. At least you can leave," Beth said, a note of envy in her voice. "You can saddle your horse and ride off whenever you please. Where would I go? What would I do? I can ride and shoot as well as any man, but that doesn't count for much when you're a woman." Without thinking, Jake reached out and touched her arm gently. "Hey now, don't sell yourself short. You're smart, capable, anyone can see that. Maybe things will work out different than you think." Beth looked down at his hand on her arm, and Jake quickly withdrew it, stepping back. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No," she said quickly. It's nice to have someone actually listen. I mean, Father just lectures, and the ladies in town whisper behind their fans. You're the first person who's actually heard me in a long time." They were standing close now, close enough that Jake could see the way her breath misted slightly in the cool air. The barn felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. "This barn's too big to feel empty," Jake said suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. He gestured at the vast space around them, the high rafters lost in shadow. "All this space, but it doesn't feel lonely right now." He paused, heat rising to his face. "Unless you're here with me, then it's just big." He winced at his own clumsiness, but Beth surprised him by smiling, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. "Are you flirting with me, Jake Morrison?" No, I just meant—" Jake fumbled for words, thoroughly flustered. "I'm sorry, Miss Hartley, that was inappropriate." "Beth," she corrected softly. "When we're alone, call me Beth." She moved closer, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. "And I don't mind. It's been a long time since anyone said something to me that wasn't about profit margins or proper behavior." Jake's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "Beth," he said, testing the name. "This is dangerous territory we're walking into." "I know," she whispered, "but I'm so tired of being safe, of doing what's expected." "Aren't you tired of it too?" Before Jake could respond, they heard voices approaching the barn, rough male voices, laughing about something. Beth stepped back quickly, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I should go," she said. "If they find me here—" "Back door," Jake said quickly. "Through the tech room. I'll handle whoever's coming." She nodded and turned to go, but paused at the entrance to the tech room. "Jake, thank you for listening, for treating me like a person instead of Samuel Hartley's daughter." Then she was gone, slipping out into the night like a shadow. Jake barely had time to compose himself before two of the ranch hands stumbled into the barn, slightly drunk from their evening in town. "Morrison," Tom Brennan called out. "What are you doing hiding in here? Thought you'd be out with the herd." "Just checking on the horses," Jake said evenly. "What are you two doing back so early?" "Early?" Hank Sawyer laughed. "It's past midnight, friend. How long you been in here talking to them horses?" Jake glanced at the barn door, surprised to realize how much time had passed. "Guess I lost track. Everything quiet in town?" "Quiet enough," Tom said, but there was something in his expression that made Jake wary. "Though there's talk about your boss bringing in some fancy fellow from Dallas. Gonna be a big to-do next month. They say engagement party or some such." Jake kept his face carefully neutral. "That's so." "Yep. Seems Miss High and Mighty is finally getting herself hitched. About time. If you ask me, girl that age ought to have a husband and young'uns by now." "Watch your tongue," Jake said sharply, before he could stop himself. Both men looked at him with raised eyebrows. Well, Hank said slowly. "Don't tell me you've gone sweet on the boss's daughter. Morrison, that's a fool's game if ever there was one." "I haven't gone sweet on anyone," Jake said. "Just don't think it's right to talk about a lady that way." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "Fair enough. But take some advice from someone who's been around longer. Keep your eyes on your work and off the big house. Men like us, we're paid to work cattle, not to have ideas above our station." After they'd gone, stumbling off to the bunkhouse, Jake stood alone in the barn, his thoughts churning. Tom was right, of course. He was a hired hand, a drifter with nothing to offer a woman like Beth Hartley. Her father would see him run off the ranch, or worse, if he even suspected what had transpired tonight. But as Jake finally made his way out to check on the herd, he couldn't forget the way she'd said his name, or the feel of her standing close in the lamplight. He'd been content with his simple life, had found peace in the routine of ranch work and the freedom of the open range. Now, that peace was shattered, replaced by a yearning he didn't know how to name. The stars wheeled overhead, silent witnesses to his turmoil. Somewhere in the big house, Beth was probably lying awake too, thinking about Charles Whitman and the cage that was closing around her. Jake wanted to help her, wanted to offer her the freedom she craved. But what could he do? He was just one man against the weight of society's expectations and Samuel Hartley's iron will. As the night wore on and the cattle lowed softly in the darkness, Jake Morrison realized that his life on the Hartley Ranch had become far more complicated than he'd ever intended. The smart thing would be to collect his wages and move on before things went any further. But as he thought of Beth's smile and the desperation in her eyes, he knew he wouldn't be riding out anytime soon. The trap was set, though whether for him or for her, he couldn't say. All he knew was that something had started in that barn, something that would either save them both or destroy them. Only time would tell which it would be. October brought cooler winds across the Texas plains, and with them came a change in the atmosphere at the Hartley Ranch. Word had spread among the hands about the impending visit from Charles Whitman, and speculation ran rampant in the bunkhouse. Jake kept his thoughts to himself, but each passing day brought a new weight to his chest. He and Beth had managed a few stolen moments since that night in the barn. A brief conversation while he repaired a gate near the garden. A shared glance when she rode past the cattle pens. Once a hurried exchange of words behind the smokehouse when she'd warned him that her father was in a particularly foul mood. Each encounter left Jake more conflicted than before, torn between his growing feelings and the knowledge of how impossible their situation was. It was on a gray afternoon in mid-October that Samuel Hartley summoned all the hands to the main yard. The rancher stood on the porch of the big house, his weathered face stern beneath his wide-brimmed hat. At 63, Hartley cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing green eyes that missed nothing. Jake had worked for hard men before, but there was something particularly unyielding about Samuel Hartley, as if the land itself had shaped him into something as unforgiving as the Texas sun. "Men," Hartley began, his voice carrying across the yard. "We'll be hosting important guests next week. Mr. Charles Whitman and his associates from Dallas will be staying at the ranch. I expect every one of you to be on your best behavior. Any man who embarrasses this ranch will find himself looking for work elsewhere. Is that understood?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled cowboys. Jake noticed Beth standing at one of the upper windows, her face pale against the glass. Their eyes met for just a moment before she turned away. "Morrison," Hartley's voice cut through Jake's thoughts. "A word." Jake stepped forward, acutely aware of the other men's curious glances. "Yes, sir." Hartley studied him for a long moment. "You've been doing good work here. Tom Brennan speaks highly of your handling of the horses." "Thank you, sir. I do my best." "See that you continue to do so," Hartley said, but there was something in his tone that made Jake wary. "A man in your position would do well to remember his place. We run a respectable operation here, and I won't tolerate any behavior that might bring shame to this ranch or my family. Do I make myself clear?" Jake met the older man's gaze steadily. "Perfectly clear, Mr. Hartley." "Good." Hartley turned to address the group again. "Back to work, all of you. We've got cattle to move before the weather turns." As the men dispersed, Jake caught Tom Brennan's arm. "What was that about?" Tom glanced around nervously. "Word of advice, friend. Whatever you think you're doing, stop it. Hartley's got eyes everywhere, and he's not a forgiving man." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," Tom said quietly. "Just remember, there was a fellow here about 5 years back. Got ideas about the missus before she passed. Hartley had him horsewhipped and run out of the county, and that was his wife having innocent conversations. Imagine what he'd do to a man who looked twice at his daughter." That evening, Jake was in the horse barn, trying to lose himself in the familiar routine of caring for the animals. When he heard approaching footsteps, His heart leaped, thinking it might be Beth, but instead, Maria, the ranch's cook, appeared in the doorway. The elderly Mexican woman had been with the Hartley family for 20 years, and her lined face showed the wisdom and weariness of someone who'd seen too much. "Mr. Jake," she said softly, glancing behind her. "I have message for you." Jake set down his curry comb. "From who?" Maria pulled a small, folded paper from her apron. "You did not get from me, Si. I see nothing, know nothing." Jake took the note, his hands trembling slightly. Maria hurried away without another word. In the dim light of the lantern, Jake unfolded the paper and recognized Beth's neat handwriting. "The old oak tree by the creek. Midnight. Please, I need to talk to you. B." Jake stared at the note for a long moment, then carefully folded it and tucked it into his shirt pocket. He knew he should ignore it, knew that meeting her would only make things worse. But he also knew he'd be there at midnight, drawn by a force stronger than common sense. The hours until midnight crawled by. Jake went through the motions of the evening meal, deflecting questions from the other hands with practiced ease. When he finally slipped out of the bunkhouse, the moon was high, casting silver shadows across the landscape. Beth was already there when he arrived, pacing beneath the massive oak tree. She wore a dark riding outfit, her hair pinned up beneath a flat-crowned hat. When she saw him, she rushed forward, then caught herself, stopping just out of reach. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "You knew I would." Jake replied, "Though we're both fools for being here, your father suspects something." "I know," Beth said miserably. "He's been watching me like a hawk, and Charles arrives in 3 days." She wrapped her arms around herself, though the night wasn't cold. "Jake, I can't do this. I can't marry him." "Have you told your father that?" Beth laughed bitterly. "Tell him. He wouldn't listen if I did. Mother tried to tell him things once, tried to make him understand that she was suffocating here. He never heard her, just like he doesn't hear me." "What happened to your mother?" Jake asked gently. "If you don't mind my asking." Beth was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "She fell in love with someone else, a traveling merchant who came through town. Nothing improper happened. Mother would never. But Father found some letters, innocent things. Really, just 2 lonely people finding comfort in words." She paused, staring up at the stars. "Father burned the letters and forbade her from going to town. She became a prisoner in her own home. 6 months later, she took ill with pneumonia. I've always wondered if she simply gave up fighting." Jake moved closer, aching to comfort her but not daring to touch. "Beth, I'm sorry. The worst part," Beth continued, "is that Father thinks he was protecting her, protecting the family honor. He tells people she died of a weak constitution, but I know the truth. She died of a broken spirit." "You're not your mother," Jake said firmly. "You're stronger than that." "Am I?" Beth turned to face him, tears glittering on her cheeks. "Because right now, I feel like I'm drowning. Charles Whitman is everything Father wants, wealthy, connected, respectable. He'll merge our ranch with his business empire and create a dynasty. And I'll be the broodmare who makes it all possible." "Don't say that," Jake said sharply. "Why not? It's the truth." Beth's voice rose slightly. "Do you know what Charles said when he visited last month? He examined me like I was livestock he was considering purchasing, commented on my good breeding and sturdy frame, said I'd give him strong sons." Jake's hands clenched into fists. "The bastard. He's not cruel," Beth said wearily. "Just practical. To him, marriage is another business transaction, and I'm the commodity being traded." They stood in silence for a moment, the creek gurgling softly nearby. Finally, Jake spoke. "What if you ran, left all this behind?" "And go where? With what money? I have nothing of my own. Jake, everything belongs to Father. Even if I could leave, he'd hunt me down. His reach extends far beyond this county." "Then we'll go farther," Jake said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. California, Oregon Territory, even Mexico if we have to, somewhere he can't follow. Beth stared at him. We? Jake took a deep breath. I know I've got no right to say this. I'm just a drifter, a man with nothing to offer but hard work and harder living. But Beth, I care for you, more than I should. If you want to run, I'll take you. I'll keep you safe. Jake, Beth breathed, moving closer. Do you mean that? Every word, he said. I know it wouldn't be easy. We'd be starting with nothing, building from scratch. You'd go from this, he gestured toward the ranch, to whatever we could scrape together, but you'd be free. Beth reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered cheek. Freedom with you sounds better than a prison made of gold. Jake caught her hand, pressing it against his face. Think about what you're saying. Once we leave, there's no coming back. Your father would disown you. You'd lose everything. I'd lose nothing that matters, Beth said fiercely. What good is wealth if I can't breathe? What good is respectability if it comes at the cost of my soul? Unable to resist any longer, Jake pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, burying her face against his chest. They stood that way for a long moment, holding each other beneath the stars, both aware they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. When? Beth asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. After Whitman leaves, Jake said, thinking quickly. It'll be chaos with the visit. Once things settle down, your father will relax his guard. We'll need supplies, money if we can manage it. I've got some saved, but not much. I have Mother's jewelry, Beth said. Father doesn't know I kept it. It's not much, but it might buy us a start somewhere. Jake pulled back to look at her face. Are you sure about this? Once we run, we'll be outlaws in your father's eyes. He might send men after us. Then we'll keep running, Beth said with determination. Jake, I've been dying slowly for years. You're offering me a chance to live. How can I say no to that? He kissed her then, their first real kiss, beneath the oak tree with the moon as witness. It was desperate and sweet, and tinged with the knowledge of all they were risking. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. I should go, Beth said reluctantly. If I'm discovered missing. Go, Jake agreed. Be careful. Act normal. Don't give him any reason to suspect. When will I see you again? I'll find a way. Jake promised. Even if it's just a moment. We'll make our plans. Beth started to leave, then turned back. Jake, that night in the barn, when you said it was too big to feel empty unless I was there? Yeah? I understand now what you meant. Every space feels empty without you in it. Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost. Jake stood alone beneath the oak tree, his lips still tingling from their kiss, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. He'd crossed the line now, declared himself. There was no going back. As he made his way carefully back to the bunkhouse, Jake thought about what lay ahead. Samuel Hartley was not a man to cross lightly. If their plan failed, if they were caught, the consequences would be severe. But as he remembered the desperation in Beth's eyes and the way she'd felt in his arms, Jake knew he'd risk anything to see her free. The die was cast. Now all that remained was to see how it would fall. The morning Charles Whitman arrived at the Hartley Ranch dawned clear and cold, with a bite in the air that promised winter's approach. Jake was working with the horses when the convoy of carriages rolled up the main drive, dust swirling in their wake. He forced himself to focus on the bay gelding he was training, but his eyes kept drifting to the scene unfolding at the big house. Whitman cut an impressive figure as he stepped down from the lead carriage, tall and broad, with prematurely silver hair and a well-tailored suit that spoke of city wealth. He moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Jake watched as Samuel Hartley greeted him with a firm handshake, and then Beth appeared on the porch, dressed in a green silk dress that Jake had never seen before, even from a distance. Jake could see the stiffness in her posture as Whitman took her hand and brought it to his lips. The gesture should have been courtly, But something about it made Jake's jaw clench. "Easy there, Morrison," Tom Brennan said, appearing at Jake's elbow. "That horse can feel every bit of tension in your body." Jake forced himself to relax, turning his attention back to the gelding. "Just concentrating on the work." Tom snorted. "Sure you are. Word of advice, make yourself scarce the next few days. Hartley's already on edge, and Whitman's brought some rough-looking men with him. Private security, he calls them, but they look more like hired guns to me." That evening, Jake was repairing tack in the barn when chaos erupted outside. Shouts and gunfire split the air, followed by the thunder of hooves. Jake grabbed a rifle from the wall and rushed out to find masked riders storming through the ranch, firing wildly. In the confusion, he saw cattle scattering, men diving for cover, and flames beginning to lick at the feed storage building. Without thinking, Jake ran toward the big house. If these were raiders, they'd target the family first. He rounded the corner of the main building just in time to see two masked men forcing their way through the front door. Through a window, he glimpsed Beth backing away from them, her father shoving her behind him. Jake didn't hesitate. He crashed through the side door and into the parlor just as one of the raiders raised his gun toward Samuel Hartley. Jake's rifle spoke first, the shot catching the man in the shoulder and spinning him around. The second raider turned, but Jake was already moving, using the rifle butt to club him down. "Get down!" Jake shouted as more gunfire erupted outside. He positioned himself between the family and the windows, scanning for more threats. "The safe!" Hartley gasped. They were after the safe, but Jake wasn't listening. His attention was on Beth, checking to make sure she was unharmed. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and he saw gratitude mixed with fear in her gaze. Charles Whitman burst into the room then, a pearl-handled pistol in his hand. "What's happening? Are you hurt, my dear?" He moved to Beth's side, placing a proprietary hand on her arm. "Morrison here stopped them," Hartley said, his voice grudging. "Probably saved our lives." The next hour was chaos. 3 ranch hands were dead, including old Miguel who'd worked the ranch for 15 years. Several others were wounded. The raiders had escaped with some horses and supplies, but Jake's intervention had prevented them from reaching the safe where Hartley kept the ranch's cash reserves. As the sun set, the surviving hands gathered the bodies and tended to the wounded. Jake found himself summoned to Hartley's study, where the rancher sat behind his massive desk, Whitman standing beside him like a sentinel. "Sit down, Morrison," Hartley commanded. Jake remained standing. "I prefer to stand, sir." Hartley's eyes narrowed, but he didn't press the issue. "You showed courage today. Quick thinking. That's twice now you've proven your worth to this ranch." "Just doing my job, Mr. Hartley." "No," Whitman interjected smoothly. "You went above and beyond. A man like you is wasted as a simple ranch hand." He studied Jake with calculating eyes. "I could use men of your caliber in my organization. Better pay, better opportunities. What do you say?" Jake met his gaze steadily. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Whitman, but I'm content where I am." "Content?" Whitman's smile didn't reach his eyes. "A man should aspire to more than contentment. Morrison, think about it. My offer stands." After Jake left, he found Beth waiting in the shadows near the bunkhouse. She grabbed his arm, pulling him into the darkness between buildings. "You could have been killed," she whispered fiercely. "So could you," Jake replied. "I couldn't let that happen." "Jake, this changes things. Father's suspicious of everyone now. He'll be watching constantly. And Charles," she shuddered. "He's been asking questions about you, about all the hands, but especially you." "Let him ask. I've got nothing to hide." "Don't you understand?" Beth's voice was desperate. "He sees you as a threat, not to our relationship. He couldn't imagine that, but to his authority. You showed him up today, proved yourself the better man. He won't forget that." Before Jake could respond, they heard footsteps approaching. Beth melted back into the shadows just as Hank Sawyer appeared. "Morrison, that you? Hartley wants all hands in the main yard. He's doubling the night watch." The next few days passed in heightened tension. The ranch operated under siege mentality, with armed men patrolling constantly. Jake caught only glimpses of Beth, always in the company of either her father or Whitman. The Dallas businessman seemed to have attached himself to her side, a development that made Jake's blood boil. It was Tom Brennan who brought Jake the news that changed everything. He found Jake in the horse pasture, mending fence under the afternoon sun. "You hear the latest?" Tom asked, glancing around nervously. "About what?" "About who was really behind the raid." Tom lowered his voice. "Couple of the boys were in town last night. Heard some interesting talk. Seems those raiders were too well informed. Knew exactly when the ranch would be vulnerable." Jake's hand stilled on the wire. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe someone wanted to play hero. Maybe someone wanted to show Samuel Hartley that he needed better protection for his ranch and his daughter." Tom spat in the dust. "Mighty convenient that Whitman's men were all mysteriously absent when the raiders hit, don't you think?" The implications hit Jake like a sledgehammer. "You think Whitman arranged the raid?" "I don't think nothing," Tom said carefully. "But if I were you, I'd watch my back. Man who'd orchestrate something like that wouldn't hesitate to remove any complications." That night, Jake lay awake in his bunk, mind racing. If Whitman had indeed arranged the raid, then 3 innocent men had died as part of his scheme. The thought filled Jake with cold fury. But what could he do? He had no proof, only suspicions and second-hand rumors. The next morning brought new drama. Jake was working in the stable when he heard raised voices from the main house. Through the window, he could see Samuel Hartley and Charles Whitman in heated discussion on the porch. Beth stood between them, her face pale but determined. Suddenly, she broke away from both men and ran toward the stables. Jake barely had time to duck into an empty stall before she burst through the doors. "Beth?" He stepped out carefully. "What's wrong?" She was breathing hard, her eyes wild. "They've moved up the engagement. Father wants to announce it tomorrow night. Charles insists we marry within the month." She grabbed his hands. "Jake, I can't wait any longer. We have to leave tonight." "Tonight?" Jake's mind raced. "We're not ready. We don't have supplies." "I don't care." Beth's voice cracked. "I heard them talking. Charles knows about us. Not everything, but he suspects. He told Father I've been too familiar with the help. After tomorrow night, I won't be able to leave the house without a chaperone." Jake pulled her into his arms, feeling her tremble against him. "All right. Tonight. Can you get to the oak tree? I'll find a way. Bring only what you can carry. We'll have to travel light and fast." She pulled back to look at him. "You're sure?" "Once we run—" "I've never been more sure of anything," Jake said firmly. "I won't let them cage you, Beth. Not Whitman, not your father, not anyone." She kissed him then, quick and desperate. "Midnight. I'll be there." After she left, Jake began his preparations. He selected 2 of the best horses, ones that could handle hard riding. He packed what supplies he could steal without arousing suspicion: dried beef, hardtack, ammunition, blankets. His hands were steady, but his heart raced. They were really doing this. As the sun set on what would be his last day at the Hartley Ranch, Jake Morrison looked around at the place that had been his home for the past months. He'd found something here he hadn't been looking for: love, and a woman worth risking everything for. Now they would discover if love was enough to overcome the forces arrayed against them. The die was cast. In a few hours, they would run, and their real story would begin. Jake touched the gun at his hip, a grim reminder that not everyone would be happy to see them go. Whitman had already proven he was willing to shed blood to get what he wanted. Jake prayed he wouldn't have to do the same, but he was prepared if it came to that. The barn felt too big and empty as he made his final preparations, and Jake allowed himself a bitter smile. Soon enough, he and Beth would be together, and no space would feel empty again, if they survived what was coming. The grand parlor of the Hartley Ranch had been transformed for the engagement announcement. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the assembled guests. Ranchers, businessmen, their wives in rustling silk gowns. Beth stood beside Charles Whitman, her emerald dress making her skin look pale as porcelain. Her smile was fixed, her posture rigid as Whitman's hand rested possessively on her elbow. Jake watched from his position near the servants' entrance, having volunteered for guard duty to keep an eye on the proceedings. His saddlebags were already packed and hidden in the barn, 2 horses ready for their midnight flight. Just a few more hours, and they would be free. Samuel Hartley raised his glass, his voice booming across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to announce the engagement of my daughter, Elizabeth, to Mr. Charles Whitman of Dallas." Polite applause filled the room. Jake saw Beth's fingers tighten on her champagne glass, her knuckles white. Whitman leaned down to whisper something in her ear, and Jake had to force himself not to move when he saw her flinch. Furthermore, Whitman took over, his smooth voice carrying easily. "I'm pleased to announce that the wedding will take place in 2 weeks' time. My business requires my presence in Dallas, and I'm eager to bring my bride home." 2 weeks. Jake felt the timeline slipping away from them. Tonight's escape had become even more critical. As the evening wore on, Jake noticed something troubling. Whitman's men, the ones Tom had rightly identified as hired guns rather than mere security, were positioned strategically throughout the house and grounds. More concerning still, they seemed particularly watchful of the exits. A cold suspicion began to form in Jake's mind. He caught Maria in the hallway as she carried a tray of empty glasses. "Maria?" he whispered urgently. "I need you to get a message to Miss Beth. Tell her—" "I can tell her nothing," Maria interrupted, her eyes sad. "Mr. Whitman, he has forbidden it. Any servant caught speaking privately to Miss Beth will be dismissed immediately." Jake's suspicion crystallized into certainty. Whitman knew. Maybe not the details, but he knew Beth was planning something, as if summoned by Jake's thoughts. Whitman appeared in the hallway. Up close, Jake could see the calculating coldness in the man's eyes, so at odds with his pleasant smile. "Morrison," Whitman said, "taking a break from your duties. Just heading back outside." "Sir," Jake replied evenly. "Good, good." Whitman moved closer, lowering his voice. "You know, my offer still stands. A man of your capabilities could go far in my employ. Of course, that would require absolute loyalty. The kind of loyalty that puts aside any personal feelings that might conflict with business." Jake met his gaze steadily. "I've always been loyal to those who treat me fair, Mr. Whitman." "Fair," Whitman chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Fairness is a luxury men like us can't afford. Morrison, there are winners and losers in this world. The trick is making sure you're on the right side." He paused. "My bride-to-be seems distressed this evening. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "Can't say that I would, sir." "No, I suppose you wouldn't." Whitman's smile was sharp as a blade. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Morrison, and do be careful out there. I'd hate for any accidents to befall one of Hartley's best men." The threat was unmistakable. As Whitman walked away, Jake knew their carefully laid plans were in danger. He needed to warn Beth, but how? The party showed no signs of ending, and Whitman's men were everywhere. An hour before midnight, Jake made his decision. He couldn't wait any longer. He slipped away from his post and made his way to the barn, retrieving his hidden gear. The horses nickered softly as he saddled them. Sensing his urgency, he was tightening the last strap when he heard footsteps. His hand went to his gun, but it was Tom Brennan who appeared in the doorway. "Going somewhere, Morrison?" Tom's voice was quiet, resigned. Jake straightened slowly. "Tom, save it." Tom held up a hand. "I'm not here to stop you. Hell, if I were 20 years younger and didn't have a bum leg, I might be going with you." He glanced at the 2 saddled horses. "Taking someone along. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think." Tom interrupted. "And you're a damn fool for it, but maybe that's what it takes sometimes." A damn fool willing to risk everything. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. Here, it's not much, but it might help. Jake took the pouch, feeling the weight of coins inside. Tom, I can't. You can, and you will. Call it a wedding present, since I doubt I'll be invited to the real thing. Tom's weathered face grew serious. Whitman's men are watching all the roads. Whatever you're planning, you'd better have a good route figured out. We'll manage. I'm sure you will. Tom moved to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you're doing right by her. That girl deserves better than being sold off like prize cattle. After Tom left, Jake finished his preparations with renewed urgency. It was 1:45 when he heard commotion from the big house. Shouts, a woman's scream, the sound of breaking glass. His blood ran cold. Beth, abandoning caution. Jake ran toward the house, leading the horses. He rounded the corner to see Beth struggling with two of Whitman's men on the porch. Her evening dress was torn, her carefully styled hair coming loose. "Let me go," she was shouting. "You have no right." Jake didn't hesitate. He drew his pistol and fired into the air. "Release her, now!" The men turned, and Jake recognized them as two of the roughest of Whitman's crew. One of them smiled. Well, the hero appears. Mr. Whitman said you might show up. I said let her go." Jake's voice was deadly calm. "Jake," Beth called out. "It's a trap. They knew—" One of the men backhanded her, and Jake saw red. His next shot wasn't a warning. The man who'd struck Beth cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell. The second man reached for his gun, but Jake was already moving, crossing the distance in 3 quick strides and bringing his pistol down hard on the man's skull. Beth flew into his arms. "They were waiting for me. Charles knows everything. Father," her voice broke. "Father gave them permission to lock me in my room until the wedding." "Can you ride?" Jake asked urgently. "Yes, but—" "Then we go, now." He helped her onto one of the horses, noting how she hiked up her evening dress without hesitation. This was no time for modesty. Jake swung up onto his own mount just as more men poured out of the house. "There!" Whitman's voice cut through the night. "Stop them!" Gunfire erupted. Jake put spurs to his horse, Beth riding hard beside him. They thundered down the ranch road, bullets whining past like angry hornets. Behind them, Jake could hear shouts, the sound of more horses being saddled. They were a mile from the ranch when Beth's horse stumbled. She managed to keep her seat, but Jake could see the animal was favoring its right foreleg. "He's hurt," Beth called out. Jake quickly assessed their options. They couldn't outrun pursuit on a lame horse. "This way!" He led them off the road, into a grove of cottonwoods he knew bordered a shallow creek. They dismounted, and Jake examined the horse's leg. Not broken, thank God, but badly strained. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew closer. "We'll have to ride double." Jake decided, "Leave the injured horse here." "But they'll know." "Can't be helped." He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her, with Beth in the saddle and Jake behind, holding her secure with one arm while managing the reins with the other. They splashed into the creek. The water was cold, soaking through their boots, but it would hide their tracks. Jake guided the horse downstream, moving as quickly as he dared in the darkness. Beth leaned back against him, and he could feel her trembling, from cold or fear or both. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've ruined everything." "Nothing's ruined," Jake said firmly. "We're together. We're free. That's all that matters." They rode through the water for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. Finally, Jake guided the horse up onto the far bank. In the distance, they could still hear shouts, see the occasional flicker of torches, but the sounds were growing fainter. "Where will we go?" Beth asked. "West first," Jake said. "Then north. I know some people in Colorado who might help us, but we need to put distance between us and your father's reach. He'll never stop looking," Beth said quietly. "Neither will Charles. I've humiliated them both." "Then we'll keep running until they do stop. or until we're so far away they can't find us. Jake tightened his arm around her. I won't let them take you back. Beth, I promise you that. They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horse and let him drink. As dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, they were miles from the Hartley ranch. Beth had long since torn away the bottom of her evening dress to make riding easier, and her fancy hairstyle had given way to a simple braid that Jake had helped her fashion during one of their brief stops. Look, Beth said suddenly, pointing ahead. Jake followed her gaze to see a small homestead in the distance, little more than a soddy and a barn. But smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth and possibly food. Risky, Jake mused. Word travels fast out here. We need supplies, Beth pointed out. And she gestured at her torn evening dress. I can't travel like this. Jake considered. She was right. They needed food, proper clothing for Beth, ammunition. The question was whether the risk was worth it. All right, he decided. But let me do the talking. As they approached the homestead, a woman emerged from the soddy, shading her eyes against the morning sun. She was young, maybe 30, with the worn look of a frontier wife. Morning, folks, she called out, though her hand stayed close to the rifle leaning against the doorframe. You're out early. Jake touched his hat. Morning, ma'am. We've had some trouble on the road. Wondering if you might have some supplies to sell. We can pay. The woman's eyes traveled over them, taking in Beth's torn dress, their exhausted horse, the way they sat together on the saddle. Something in her expression softened. Trouble with family? She asked quietly. Jake hesitated, then nodded. The woman sighed. Come inside. I'll see what I can do. As they dismounted, Beth whispered, Can we trust her? We don't have much choice. Jake replied, But sometimes folks surprise you. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Sarah Garrett, proved to be one of those surprises. Over a simple breakfast of biscuits and coffee, she listened to their carefully edited story without judgment. I ran away once myself, she said finally. Didn't get far before my PA dragged me back. Married the man he chose after all. She smiled sadly. He died 2 years later in a barn-raising accident. Been on my own since. She disappeared into the back room and returned with a bundle of clothes. These were mine when I was younger. Should fit you well enough. Miss. Beth's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to thank you. Just be happy, Sarah said simply. That's thanks enough. An hour later, Beth emerged transformed. Gone was the society lady in silk and jewels. In her place stood a frontier woman in a simple calico dress and sturdy boots, her hair braided and pinned up beneath a practical bonnet. Jake thought she'd never looked more beautiful. Sarah sold them supplies, dried beans, cornmeal, salt pork. Ammunition? She refused to take more than a fair price. Despite Jake's attempts to pay extra for her kindness. Which way you headed? She asked as they prepared to leave. North, Jake said vaguely. Sarah nodded. Stay off the main roads for a few days, and if anyone comes asking, she smiled. I never saw you. As they rode away, Beth properly mounted on her own horse this time. Sarah had insisted on trading them a sturdy mare for their injured animal. Jake felt a spark of hope. They were fugitives now. True, but they were together, and there were still good people in the world. Thank you, Beth said suddenly. For what? For keeping your promise. For coming for me even when it meant ruining everything. Jake reached over and took her hand briefly. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. They rode on, two figures against the vast canvas of the frontier, leaving behind everything they'd known for the uncertain promise of freedom. Behind them lay comfort and security and the chains of expectation. Ahead lay hardship and danger and the open sky. Jake had never felt more alive. 3 weeks into their flight, Jake and Beth had settled into the rhythm of the trail. They traveled mostly at night, holing up during the day in whatever shelter they could find. Abandoned line shacks, caves, thick groves of trees. Beth had adapted to the hardship with a resilience that surprised even Jake. The soft-handed rancher's daughter had become a capable frontierswoman, able to make camp, tend the horses, and even handle a rifle when necessary. They were camped in a box canyon in the Colorado foothills when Jake first noticed the dust cloud on their back trail. He'd been watching for it, knowing that Samuel Hartley and Charles Whitman wouldn't give up easily. Now, seeing it confirmed his worst fears. "How many?" Beth asked, following his gaze. "Hard to say. Maybe a dozen riders, possibly more." Jake began breaking camp with swift efficiency. "We need to move. We can't keep running forever. Jake." Beth's voice was steady, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "The horses are wearing down. We're wearing down." Jake paused in his packing to cup her face in his hands. "Just a little longer. There's a town about 2 days north Redemption Creek. I've got a friend there who might help us." They pushed hard through the night, but by morning, the pursuit had closed the gap. Jake could make out individual riders now, and his heart sank when he recognized the lead figure, Bill Hackett, Whitman's right-hand man and reportedly one of the fastest guns in Texas. "They're gaining," Beth said unnecessarily. Jake's mind raced. They couldn't outrun fresh horses, not with their mounts near exhaustion. He made a decision that went against every instinct. "We're going to make a stand," he told Beth. "There's a defensible position about a mile ahead, an old mining camp I passed through years ago. We can hold them off there. Jake, it's our best chance. They want to take us alive. You, at least, that gives us an advantage." The abandoned mining camp was little more than a collection of rotting wooden structures clinging to the hillside. But it offered cover and high ground. Jake positioned Beth in the old assay office, its stone walls providing the best protection, while he took up position in what had been the camp store, giving him a clear field of fire down the approach trail. They didn't have long to wait. The riders appeared just after noon, spreading out as they approached the camp. Jake counted 14 men, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of men who killed for wages. Hackett's voice rang out across the dusty ground. "Morrison, Miss Hartley, we know you're in there. Come out peaceful-like, and nobody needs to get hurt." "Go to hell, Hackett," Jake shouted back. "Now, that's not very Christian of you," Hackett replied with mock hurt. "Mister, Whitman just wants his bride back, and your hide, Morrison, but that's negotiable. Send the girl out, and maybe we let you ride away." "The lady stays with me," Jake called, "and we both know Whitman doesn't leave loose ends." A shot rang out from Beth's position, kicking up dust near Hackett's horse. The animal danced sideways, and Hackett had to fight to control it. "Seems the lady's made her choice clear enough," Jake added with grim satisfaction. The attack came swiftly. Half the men dismounted and advanced on foot while the others provided covering fire. Jake picked his targets carefully, his rifle speaking with deadly accuracy. 2 men went down before the others found cover. Beth was holding her own, her shots keeping the men from flanking their position. Jake had taught her to shoot during their flight, and she'd proven a quick study, but they were vastly outnumbered, and ammunition wouldn't last forever. The firefight raged for an hour, the old camp echoing with gunfire and the cries of wounded men. Jake had taken down 3 more attackers, but a ricochet had grazed his left arm, and he could feel blood soaking his sleeve. Then, unexpectedly, a new sound joined the battle, a bugle call echoing off the canyon walls. Jake's heart leaped as he recognized the cavalry charge. Within moments, blue uniformed soldiers swept into the camp, catching Whitman's men in a crossfire. The tide turned quickly. Hackett tried to rally his men, but faced with disciplined cavalry. They broke and ran. Several were cut down as they fled. Others threw down their weapons and surrendered. A young lieutenant dismounted near Jake's position. "You Morrison?" Jake nodded, too surprised to speak. "Lieutenant James Patterson, 10th Cavalry. We got word there was trouble up this way. Seems someone named Tom Brennan thought you might need help." Tom. Jake felt a surge of gratitude for the old cowhand's foresight. "The lady?" Jake started. Is fine, Beth said. Emerging from the assay office, her dress was dusty, her face smudged with powder smoke, but she was unharmed. She flew into Jake's arms, and he held her tight, ignoring the pain in his wounded arm. Lieutenant Patterson cleared his throat. Ma'am, sir, I'm afraid there's still the matter of the law. There are warrants out for both of you. Theft, kidnapping, assault. Kidnapping? Beth's voice was incredulous. I left of my own free will. That's not what the papers say, ma'am. According to the warrant, Mr. Morrison here abducted you against your will and stole horses and supplies from the Hartley Ranch. Jake stepped forward. Lieutenant, I'll come peacefully, but the lady will speak for herself. Beth interrupted firmly. Lieutenant Patterson, I am not now, nor have I ever been, a prisoner of this man. If anyone attempted kidnapping, it was my father and Charles Whitman, trying to force me into a marriage I didn't want. The lieutenant looked uncomfortable. That may be, ma'am, but I have my orders. You'll both need to come with us. You can tell your story to the judge in Redemption Creek. As they prepared to leave with the cavalry, Jake noticed one figure among the captured men, Hackett, nursing a shoulder wound but very much alive. The gunman met Jake's eyes and smiled coldly. This ain't over, Morrison. He called out. Mister, Whitman's got a long reach and a longer memory. Shut your mouth, prisoner, Patterson ordered. But Jake felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. The ride to Redemption Creek took 2 days. Jake and Beth weren't shackled. Patterson was a decent man who treated them more like guests than prisoners, but armed troopers rode before and behind them. It was a strange reversal. Being escorted by the law they'd been running from? Redemption Creek proved to be a bustling mining town, bigger than Jake had remembered. The courthouse was a modest wooden building, but it represented law and order on the frontier. Jake's friend, a lawyer named Marcus Webb, was waiting for them. Jake, you damned fool! Marcus greeted him with a mixture of affection and exasperation. When I got Tom's telegram, I couldn't believe it. Stealing Samuel Hartley's daughter? I didn't steal anyone. Jake protested. I know that, you know that, but the law sees it different. Marcus turned to Beth. Miss Hartley, I'm going to do everything I can to help you both, but you need to understand, your father's influence reaches far. This won't be easy. They were given rooms in the local hotel, under guard, while Marcus prepared their defense. That evening, he brought troubling news. Charles Whitman's on his way here personally, Marcus reported, along with your father. Miss Hartley, they'll be here for the hearing day after tomorrow. Beth paled. Can they force me to go back? You're of age, so legally. No, but... Marcus hesitated. Whitman's claiming you're not of sound mind, that Morrison here has somehow influenced you through mesmerism or some such nonsense. If he can convince a judge of that... That's absurd, Beth exclaimed. Of course it is, but money talks loud out here, and Whitman has plenty of it. Jake stood and paced to the window, looking out at the busy street below. What if we made a deal? What kind of deal? Marcus asked warily. I'll plead guilty to the theft charges, take whatever punishment the judge hands down. In exchange, they drop all claims on Beth. Acknowledge she left of her own will. No! Beth was on her feet instantly. Jake, you can't. They'll send you to prison. Or worse, better than you being dragged back to marry Whitman. Jake said quietly. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. Beth said fiercely. We're in this together, remember? Marcus cleared his throat. There might be another way. Colorado law recognizes common law marriage. If you two were married, it would be much harder for them to claim kidnapping or undue influence. Jake and Beth looked at each other. They'd talked about marriage during their flight, dreamed of it, but always as something for the future, when they were safe. Is that what you want? Jake asked Beth softly. I've wanted it since the night you said the barn was too empty without me. She replied, but not like this, not because we're forced to. Sometimes life doesn't give us perfect choices. Jake said, but Beth, law or no law, I want to marry you. I want to stand before God and everyone and claim you as my wife. The circumstances don't change that. Beth's eyes filled with tears. Then yes, I'll marry you. Jake Morrison. Marcus smiled. I'll arrange it for tomorrow. The judge here is a fair man. He'll perform the ceremony. Might just complicate things enough to work in our favor. The next morning, in the judge's chambers with Marcus and Lieutenant Patterson as witnesses, Jake and Beth exchanged vows. It wasn't the wedding either had imagined. No flowers, no music, no gathering of friends and family. But as Jake slipped his mother's ring onto Beth's finger, he'd carried it with him for years, the only valuable thing he owned. He thought he'd never seen a more beautiful bride. I now pronounce you man and wife. Judge Harold Crampton declared, and may God help you both, because you're going to need it when Sam Hartley gets here. That evening, as Jake and Beth sat together in her hotel room, the guards had agreed to give them privacy on their wedding night. They heard commotion in the street. Looking out the window, they saw a procession of riders arriving. At the head rode Samuel Hartley, his face like a thundercloud. Beside him, Charles Whitman sat his horse with cold dignity. They're here, Beth whispered. Jake pulled her close. Let them come. You're my wife now. They can't change that. You don't know my father, Beth said quietly. Or Charles. They don't accept defeat easily. Neither do I, Jake replied. And I've got something they don't, something worth fighting for. As night fell over Redemption Creek, the newlyweds held each other close, knowing that tomorrow would bring the fight of their lives. But for tonight, they were together, married and free, in Jake's arms. Beth felt safer than she had in weeks, while Jake marveled at the turn his life had taken, from drifting cowhand to married man. All because of a pair of green eyes and a smile that had changed everything. The judge's words echoed in his mind, may God help you both. Tomorrow, they'd find out if divine intervention would be enough against the combined wealth and power of Samuel Hartley and Charles Whitman. But tonight, Jake Morrison was the richest man in Colorado, because he held everything that mattered in his arms. The courthouse was packed the next morning. Word had spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire. The wealthy Texas rancher versus his runaway daughter and the cowhand who'd stolen her. Jake sat beside Beth at the defendant's table, her hand gripping his beneath the wooden surface. Marcus Webb shuffled papers nervously while across the aisle. Samuel Hartley sat rigid as stone, his eyes never leaving his daughter. Charles Whitman had brought his own lawyer from Dallas, a sharp-featured man named Cornelius Shaw, who looked like he ate small-town attorneys for breakfast. The contrast between the two legal teams was stark. Marcus in his worn suit versus Shaw in expensive city clothes. Judge Crampton called the court to order. We're here to address multiple charges against Jake Morrison and Elizabeth Hart. He paused, correcting himself. Elizabeth Morrison. Mr. Shaw, you may present your case. Shaw rose smoothly. Your Honor, we intend to prove that Miss Hartley was coerced, manipulated, and ultimately abducted by the defendant Jake Morrison. Furthermore, we assert that this so-called marriage is invalid, performed under duress while Miss Hartley was not of sound mind. That's a lie. Beth started to rise, but Jake pulled her back down. You'll have your chance to speak, Mrs. Morrison. The judge said firmly. Continue, Mr. Shaw. The city lawyer painted a damning picture. According to his version, Jake was a predator who had targeted the innocent daughter of his employer, filling her head with romantic notions before ultimately kidnapping her when her father tried to protect her. We have witnesses, Shaw announced, who will testify to Morrison's suspicious behavior, his secret meetings with Miss Hartley, and the violence he employed in his abduction of her. The first witness was Bill Hackett, his arm still in a sling from the gunfight. Despite being a prisoner, he'd been cleaned up and presented as a respectable security professional. Mr. Morrison shot at us without provocation. Hackett testified. We were simply trying to rescue Miss Hartley, acting on her father's orders. Morrison had clearly addled her mind somehow. She even fired at us herself, which no lady in her right mind would do. Marcus's cross-examination was sharp. Mr. Hackett, how many men have you killed in your career as a security professional? Objection, Shaw called out. Irrelevant. Goes to the witness's character, Your Honor. Marcus argued. I'll allow it. Judge Crampton ruled. Hackett shifted uncomfortably. I've defended myself when necessary. How many? Marcus pressed. Maybe 7 or 8. And how much was Charles Whitman paying you to retrieve Miss Hartley? $500. A murmur ran through the courtroom. That was more than most men saw in a year. Dead or alive? Marcus asked quietly. Hackett's silence was answer enough. The next witness surprised everyone. Maria, the Hartley Ranch cook. Beth gasped when the elderly woman took the stand, helped by one of Whitman's men. Maria, Shaw began gently, tell us about Miss Elizabeth's state of mind in the weeks before she disappeared. Maria's eyes found Beth's for a moment before dropping. Miss Beth, she was troubled. Not herself, spending time in the stables, neglecting her duties. Her papa was worried. Did you ever see her with the defendant? He was always watching her, following her. I warned her to be careful, but she wouldn't listen. Beth made a sound of betrayal. Jake squeezed her hand, understanding. Maria had been like a mother to her. But Marcus wasn't finished. On cross-examination, he asked, Maria, how long have you worked for the Hartley family? 20 years. And in that time, has Mr. Hartley ever threatened your position? Maria's hands twisted in her lap. No understand. Did Mr. Hartley tell you that you'd lose your job if you didn't testify today? Objection! Shaw was on his feet, but Maria was already nodding, tears streaming down her weathered face. Lo siento, Miss Beth, she whispered. I have nowhere else to go. Samuel Hartley was the final witness for the prosecution. He took the stand like a man going to war, his testimony a mixture of paternal concern and barely controlled rage. My daughter was raised properly, he stated. She knew her duty to her family, to her position. This man, he pointed at Jake, poisoned her against us. He filled her head with foolish notions of freedom and romance. He's a drifter, a nobody who saw a chance to improve his station by stealing my daughter. What do you say to the claim that you were forcing your daughter into an unwanted marriage? Marcus asked on cross-examination. I was securing her future, Hartley replied stiffly. Charles Whitman is a respected businessman who would have given her everything, whether she wanted it or not. She didn't know what she wanted. She's a woman. They need guidance, protection. Like your wife needed? Marcus asked softly. The courtroom fell silent. Hartley's face darkened dangerously. How dare you? Your wife died of a broken heart, didn't she? Locked away because she dared to have feelings you didn't approve of? Objection! Shaw shouted. This is hearsay and prejudicial. Withdrawn, Marcus said, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt was planted. After a brief recess, it was the defense's turn. Jake took the stand first, telling his story simply and honestly. How he'd come to work at the ranch, his growing feelings for Beth, her desperation to escape a forced marriage. I didn't kidnap her, he stated firmly. I helped her escape. There's a difference. You shot several men, Shaw pointed out on cross-examination, who were trying to drag her back against her will. I'd do it again. So you admit to theft of horses and supplies? I took what we needed to survive. I'll make restitution if the court requires it. And you expect us to believe that Miss Hartley, a sheltered, proper young lady, suddenly decided to throw away everything for a saddle tramp like you? Jake's jaw tightened. I expect you to believe that Beth, Mrs. Morrison, is a grown woman who can make her own choices, and she chose me. But it was Beth's testimony that turned the tide. She took the stand with quiet dignity, wearing the simple dress Sarah Garrett had given her. Gone was any trace of the pampered rancher's daughter. In her place stood a woman who'd found her strength. My father means well, she began, surprising everyone with her generosity. He believes he was protecting me, but protection became a prison. When Charles Whitman came to the ranch, I saw my future, a lifetime of being owned. traded from my father's control to my husband's, never free to make my own choices. And Mr. Morrison offered you an alternative? Marcus prompted. Jake offered me hope. Beth said simply. He saw me as a person, not property. He risked everything to help me when he could have just ridden away. Your father claims you were manipulated, not in your right mind. Shaw interjected. Beth's green eyes flashed. My mind has never been clearer. I chose to leave. I chose to marry Jake. And given the chance, I'd choose him again. Even knowing it means giving up your inheritance? Your position in society? Mr. Shaw, Beth said quietly. I've slept under the stars, gone hungry, been shot at, and worn the same dress for days. And I've been happier in these past weeks than in all my years in that big house. What good is money if you can't breathe? What good is position if it comes with chains? Samuel Hartley made a strangled sound from the gallery. Beth turned to face him directly. I love you, Father. I always will. But I'm not Mother. I won't waste away waiting for a life that never comes. Jake makes me feel alive. He makes me feel free. Can't you understand that? For a moment, something flickered in Samuel Hartley's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. Then his face hardened again. You're no daughter of mine, he said coldly. Beth flinched as if slapped, but her voice remained steady. Then I suppose that settles the question of kidnapping. You can't steal what's already been thrown away. The judge called for closing arguments. Shaw painted Jake as a fortune hunter and Beth as a victim of her own romantic delusions. Marcus countered by framing it as a love story. Two people fighting against injustice for the right to choose their own path. Judge Crampton retired to consider his decision. The courtroom buzzed with speculation as they waited. Jake and Beth sat close together, preparing for whatever came next. Whatever happens, Beth whispered. I regret nothing. Neither do I, Jake replied. Except maybe not stealing more horses. We could have used them, despite everything. Beth smiled. An hour later, Judge Crampton returned. The courtroom fell silent as he began to speak. This court has heard testimony regarding theft, kidnapping, and questions of competence. Let me address each in turn. He looked at Jake. Mr. Morrison, the evidence clearly shows you took horses and supplies from the Hartley Ranch. For this, you're guilty of theft? Jake's heart sank, but the judge continued. However, given the circumstances that you were aiding someone in distress, that you took only what was necessary for survival, this court sentences you to time served and orders restitution of $100 to be paid to Mr. Hartley within 1 year. $100. It would take most of Jake's savings, but it was manageable. As to the charge of kidnapping, the judge continued, his eyes moving to Beth. This court finds no evidence that Mrs. Morrison was taken against her will. A woman of legal age has the right to leave her father's house, regardless of his wishes. The charge is dismissed. Beth sagged with relief against Jake. Furthermore, Judge Crampton's voice rose over the growing murmur in the courtroom. This court recognizes the marriage between Jake and Elizabeth Morrison as legal and binding. Mr. Whitman, Mr. Hartley, you have no claim on this woman. She has made her choice, and the law supports it. The courtroom erupted. Charles Whitman shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. This is not over, he shouted. I'll appeal. You'll do nothing, a new voice said from the back of the room. Lieutenant Patterson stood there with several of his men. Mr. Whitman, I'm arresting you on suspicion of organizing the raid on the Hartley Ranch. We've got one of your men willing to testify in exchange for leniency. The revelation sent another shockwave through the crowd. Whitman tried to protest, but the soldiers were already moving to take him into custody. Samuel Hartley stood slowly, his age showing for the first time. He looked at Beth for a long moment, then turned and walked out without a word. The finality of it was worse than any curse. As the courtroom cleared, Marcus clapped Jake on the back. You're free, both of you. Though I'd suggest leaving town soon. Hartley might accept the legal decision, but there are other ways to seek revenge. Outside the courthouse, Jake and Beth stood in the afternoon sun, still processing what had happened. They were free, legally married, but also cut off from Beth's family, with little money and an uncertain future. "What now?" Beth asked. Jake pulled her close. "Now we start that life we talked about. It won't be easy." "I don't want easy," Beth interrupted. "I want real. I want to build something with my own hands, make my own decisions, face whatever comes knowing I chose it." "Then Mrs. Morrison," Jake said with a smile, "I suggest we get our horses and head west. I hear there's good land in Wyoming territory, places where a man and woman can start fresh." "Our horses?" Beth raised an eyebrow. "I thought you only paid for one." "Well," Jake grinned, "we might need to negotiate that, but I figure your father owes you at least a horse for your years of service." Beth laughed, the sound free and joyous. "Jake Morrison, are you suggesting we steal from my father again?" "Borrow," Jake corrected. "We're borrowing, with interest paid in the form of not having to see his son-in-law at family gatherings." They walked toward the livery stable hand in hand, their future uncertain but their own. Behind them, the courthouse stood as a monument to their victory, not just legal, but personal. They'd stood up to power and tradition and won the right to choose their own path. As they prepared to ride out of Redemption Creek, Jake remembered his words from that night in the barn, what now seemed like a lifetime ago. The space around them was vast, the western frontier stretching endlessly ahead. But with Beth beside him, it didn't feel empty at all. The Wyoming territory stretched before them like a promise, vast and untamed under the endless sky. Jake and Beth had been riding for 6 months since leaving Redemption Creek, working their way north through Colorado, taking odd jobs when they could find them. The money from Beth's mother's jewelry had helped, but they'd learned to live lean, to make do with little. It was early spring when they finally found it, a valley tucked between rolling hills, with a clear stream running through it and good grass for grazing. The land was unclaimed, part of the territory still open for homesteading. "This is it," Jake said, dismounting to let the soil run through his fingers. "This is home." Beth stood beside him, surveying their kingdom. It wasn't much. 160 acres they could claim under the Homestead Act, provided they could prove it up in 5 years. But it was theirs. "We'll need to file the claim in town," Beth said practically, "and we'll need supplies, tools, seed for planting, and lumber for a cabin." Jake added, "Can't expect you to live in a tent forever. I've lived in worse places." Beth reminded him, "That cave in Colorado wasn't exactly luxury." They made camp by the stream that night, planning their future by firelight. The next morning, they rode to the nearest town, Sage Creek, a rough settlement that served the scattered ranchers and farmers of the area. The land office clerk, a thin man named Elmore Hutchins, looked surprised when Beth stepped forward to sign the papers alongside Jake. "Both names on the claim?" he asked. "Both names," Beth said firmly. "We're partners in this." It took most of their remaining money to buy supplies: tools, nails, a plow, seed corn, beans, and potatoes. Jake found work with a local rancher, promising 2 weeks of labor in exchange for the loan of a team to haul lumber from the sawmill, while Jake was gone. Beth started their garden, breaking the virgin soil with a determination that would have shocked those who'd known her as a pampered rancher's daughter. Her hands blistered and bled, but she kept working. This was their land, their future. Every seed planted was an act of defiance against those who'd said she couldn't survive without her father's wealth. Jake returned to find she'd not only started the garden, but had also laid out the foundation for their cabin, marking the corners with stones. "You've been busy," he said, impressed. "We've got 5 years to prove this claim," Beth replied. "I don't intend to waste a day." Building the cabin was the hardest work either had ever done. They raised the walls together, Jake teaching Beth how to notch logs, Beth proving she could swing an axe as well as any man. At night, exhausted and aching, they'd fall asleep in their tent, holding each other close against the cold. It was during the roof raising that trouble found them. Jake was balanced on the ridge beam when he saw riders approaching, 5 men, moving with the purposeful pace of those on a mission. "Beth," he called quietly. "Company coming." She emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand. The months of hard living had changed her. She was leaner, stronger, her skin bronzed from the sun. But her eyes were the same green Jake had fallen in love with. The lead rider was a man named Carl Duggan, who owned the largest spread in the valley. He dismounted slowly, his eyes taking in their improvements. "Morrison," he said, though they'd never met. "Heard you'd settled here." "News travels," Jake replied, climbing down from the roof. "That it does." Duggan spat tobacco juice. "Also heard you had some trouble down Texas way. Something about stealing another man's woman." "I didn't steal anyone," Jake said evenly. "This is my wife, Beth." "Ma'am." Duggan touched his hat mockingly. "Thing is, we've got a nice peaceful valley here. Don't need no troublemakers bringing their past with them." "We're not looking for trouble," Beth said. "Just to build a life. Sometimes trouble comes looking for you." Duggan replied, "Had a visitor last week. Well-dressed fellow from Texas, asking questions about newcomers. Offered good money for information." Jake's hand moved to his gun. "And?" "Told him I hadn't seen nothing." Duggan smiled thinly. "But that was before I knew you were here. Might have to reconsider if you turn out to be poor neighbors." "What do you want?" Jake asked bluntly. "Water rights." Duggan said immediately, "That stream runs through my land downstream. I need guaranteed access during dry seasons." "Done," Jake agreed. "We'll put it in writing." Duggan looked surprised at the easy acquiescence. "Just like that? We're not looking to make enemies," Beth said. "We just want to be left alone." After Duggan and his men left, Jake and Beth worked with renewed urgency. If Hartley or Whitman's men were still searching, they needed to be ready. By the first snow, they had a solid one-room cabin with a good fireplace and a root cellar. The harvest had been small but sufficient. They'd preserved vegetables, smoked venison, laid in supplies for winter. On cold nights, they'd sit by the fire, Jake carving furniture while Beth read from the few books they'd managed to acquire. "Any regrets?" Jake asked one evening as wind howled outside. "Only one," Beth said. Jake looked up, concerned. "What's that?" "That barn you mentioned back in Texas." She smiled. "You were right. It was too big and empty. This cabin is just the right size." Spring brought new challenges. The stream flooded, washing out part of their garden. A late freeze killed their first planting, but they persevered, replanting, rebuilding. Jake found occasional work with neighboring ranchers, while Beth sold eggs from the chickens they'd acquired and vegetables from their expanded garden. It was in their second summer that the past finally caught up with them. Jake was in town buying supplies when he noticed a familiar figure at the saloon, Bill Hackett, his arm fully healed, asking questions. Jake slipped out the back, racing home to warn Beth. They'd prepared for this possibility, had plans in place, but when he arrived, he found Beth calmly working in the garden. "He's here," Jake said breathlessly. "Hackett, in town." Beth straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "Then we face him." "Beth, no, Jake, no more running. This is our home. We've built it with our own hands, our own sweat. I won't let them drive us off." An hour later, Hackett rode up to their cabin, but he wasn't alone. With him was Marcus Webb, their lawyer from Redemption Creek. "Easy, folks," Marcus called out, seeing Jake's rifle. "I'm here with good news." Hackett dismounted, his movements careful. "Morrison, Mrs. Morrison." His tone was respectful, surprising them both. "What's this about?" Jake demanded. Marcus smiled. "It's about closure, mister. Hackett has a proposition." Hackett cleared his throat. "Whitman's dead. Shot in a prison escape attempt 6 months ago. And old Sam Hartley." He paused. "He sent me to find you." "To bring us back?" Beth asked, her voice steady. "To bring you this." Hackett pulled out a leather envelope. "It's a deed. To a section of the Hartley ranch," the old man said. He looked uncomfortable. He said he was wrong. Said your mother would have wanted you to have something. Beth took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was indeed a deed to 500 acres of prime grassland, including the spot where she and Jake used to meet. I don't understand, she whispered. He's sick, Hackett explained. Dying. Actually, Doc gives him maybe a month. He said he spent 5 years being angry, and what did it get him? An empty house and no family. He looked at Jake. He also said to tell you that you were right. The barn is too big when it's empty. Beth was crying now, clutching the deed. Jake put his arm around her. There's a condition, Marcus added gently. He wants to see you, both of you, before the end. Jake and Beth looked at each other, a whole conversation in a glance. We'll come, Beth said finally, but not to stay. Our life is here now. Hackett nodded. He figured as much. Also said to tell you the $100 restitution is forgiven. Considered it a bride price, he said. After the men left, Jake and Beth sat on their porch, watching the sun set over their valley. The deed to the Texas land lay on the table between them, a fortune in land, enough to make them wealthy. What will we do with it? Jake asked. Sell it, Beth said without hesitation. Use the money to buy more land here, maybe some good breeding stock, build something lasting. You sure? It's your inheritance. Beth took his hand. My inheritance is what we've built together. That's just money. This, she gestured at their cabin, their garden, their life. This is wealth. A month later, they made the journey to Texas. Samuel Hartley was indeed dying, shrunken and gray in his big bed. The reunion was awkward, painful, but necessary. Forgiveness was given, if not fully felt. They stayed for the funeral, Beth the only family to mourn at his grave. Tom Brennan was there, grinning to see them. Knew you two would make it, he said. Got a feeling about these things. They sold the Texas land to Duggan's cousin, using the money to expand their Wyoming holdings. Within 5 years, they'd proved up their homestead claim and bought 3 more sections. The Morrison Ranch became known for good horses and fair dealing, but the heart of it remained that first cabin by the stream, expanded now but still cozy. It was there that Beth brought their first child into the world, a daughter they named Sarah after the woman who'd helped them escape. 2 sons followed, strong boys who grew up free under the Wyoming sky. On their 10th anniversary, Jake found Beth in the barn they'd built, far smaller than the one at her father's ranch, but perfect for their needs. Remember what I said that night? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. That it was too big to feel empty unless I was there? Yeah. Was I wrong? Beth turned in his arms, her face still beautiful despite the lines that hard work and sun had etched there. No, you were exactly right. Every space without you still feels too empty. They stood together in their barn, on their land, built by their hands and their love, outside. Their children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the wind. The past was buried, the future bright with possibility. Jake Morrison had started with nothing but a horse and a saddle. He'd found everything in a pair of green eyes and the courage of a woman who chose freedom over fortune. And Beth Hartley Morrison had traded a prison of gold for a kingdom of grass and sky and love. The barn wasn't too big anymore. It was just right. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and let me know your thoughts on Jake and Beth's journey. Did their love story touch your heart? What was your favorite moment? Share your feelings and join our community of Western romance lovers.